Welcome, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the carnival events. Today's session is in celebration of INI's 20-year anniversary. The INI, or the Information Networking Institute, is a department in the College of Engineering that offers professional graduate degree programs in networking, information security, mobility, and software management in Pittsburgh, in Silicon Valley through bicoastal programs that combine time here in Pittsburgh and Silicon Valley, and international programs in Athens, Greece, Kobe, Japan, and Lisbon and Aveiro, Portugal. We're very fortunate that we have a great group of panelists here today, and leading this panel, moderating this panel, is the Dean of the College of Engineering, Pradeep Khosla, who was also formerly one of the directors of INI. And he is the founder of Carnegie Mellon CyLab, which is an interdisciplinary initiative involving more than 200 faculty, staff, and students from across the university solving problems related to secure, available, trustworthy communication systems. And I probably left one of the adjectives out, but that's okay. I will introduce Pradeep briefly. His other positions prior to being Dean of the College of Engineering, he was head of the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, founder and director of the Institute for Complex Engineered Systems, or otherwise known as ISIS, the program manager for DARPA, where he managed a $50 million portfolio of programs in real-time systems, internet-enabled software, infrastructure, intelligence systems, and distributed systems. And as I mentioned before, he was director of INI. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Pradeep.
Thank you, Dina. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad she stopped. Otherwise, that would be the panel. Reading somebody's resume, which is irrelevant.
I actually didn't read it all. There were like 2 more paragraphs.
So we have a great set of panelists here today. And the question in front of the panel is security and privacy. Is there a trade-off, if any, and how can we get both together? It seems to me going in, this is like proving P equals NP. So I don't know how many of you know what that problem is, but it's one of those problems which is like the holy grail of computer scientists. We're still trying to work on it. But instead of me talking, the goal today for the next hour is for my colleagues out here to talk. So what I'm going to do is give 30 seconds to each one of them to tell you their name and their number. As in not their I thought the social security number is a better identifier than the name, but Alessandro would disagree with me. And name and their affiliation, and then after that, each one would get about 2 to 3 minutes to talk about the issue at hand, and then we'll follow that up with question and answers, initially from me, and then open it up to the audience. Is that good? So let me start with, right to my left here, Alessandro.
I'm Alessandro Acquisti, and my date of birth is... I'm an economist by training. I'm interested in the economics of privacy, which is a study of the trade-offs associated with protecting and revealing data. But more and more in the last years here at CMU, given the great interaction I could have with security people and psychologists and behavioral decision researchers, I got interested in what I call the behavioral economics of privacy, which is understanding how people, as well as organizations, make decisions about their data, their privacy, their security, and how those decisions can be biased in a cognitive and behavioral sense. And maybe later on in the panel we'll get to explain what it really means.
Adrian?
My name is Adrian Perrig. I'm a faculty here in ECE, EPP, and computer science. Teach several of the INI classes. I'm seeing some familiar faces, students who have suffered in my classes, I guess. But I hope in retrospect you all enjoyed it and made you stronger and better. So I teach one of the network security classes, and the trade-off between security and privacy is an important challenge in that environment for secure networks, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Lorrie?
Hi, I'm Lorrie Cranor, and I'm a faculty member here in Engineering and Public Policy and in Computer Science. And I direct a lab that's part of CyLab. It's called the CyLab Usable Privacy and Security Laboratory. So my research is focused on human factors related to security and privacy. And when people hear that I do usable privacy and security, and they say, well, isn't that an oxymoron? Can you really do all those things together, or even any two of them? And I hope the answer is that, yes, we can find ways of doing these things together.
Roman?
Hi, I'm Roman Danyliw. I'm the technical director of the Cyber Threat and Vulnerability Analysis at the Software Engineering Institute. That's a federal lab here, and if you take it with the humor intended, I guess my core business is anti-privacy. We're building tech to make sure that, from the perspective of the U.S. government, we can understand as much as we possibly can. We're here to help, of course. Oh, and of course, most important, I'm an MS-11.
Matt?
My name is Matt Kaar. I'm a MS-16. I graduated in 2006 with a security degree. After I did that, I went to go work for the MITRE Corporation, and I'm currently an InfoSec engineer with them. And I help, my job is I help the government field cross-domain solutions, and that probably doesn't mean a whole lot to anybody in the crowd, but they're systems that connect unclassified networks with classified networks and help for information sharing. The kind of like Mission Impossible, where the guy went into the room that was a clean room and nobody else could go in there. That's not really real life. Actually, we have computers that have connections both to the classified side and the unclassified side. And so from a privacy perspective, I guess I'm focused on how we can help that sharing to be done in a more responsible way.
Thank you. So let me start with, as you see, we have an eclectic combination of people who do security, people who do privacy, people for privacy, people against privacy, or at least one of them. And so what I want to do is I want to start with this whole notion of information sharing, which I think is a fundamental notion, whether it is security or privacy, because in some sense, when you give Giant Eagle your information, you're sharing your information with Giant Eagle. Now, people might disagree with me. They might think it's private information. So let me start with Matt, because he works a lot with Department of Defense. And I want to understand on when you fight a war and a multinational force is on the ground with different set of systems, talk a little bit about information sharing and who decides who gets what and what is good to tell who.
Certainly. So, this is from my kind of seat in McLean, Virginia, and I'm very far away from the battlefield, and I should say that all of my opinions are my own and do not represent my employer. That they actually tell us to say that. But I do think that there is a delicate balance, because the U.S., from what I've seen, is they're very comfortable with going to war where they control both the battle space and all the information that's exchanged in that battle space, and they fight the wars on networks that they completely control and own. But when it comes to coalition operations, typically the networks then become jointly owned and jointly maintained. So all of the countries that are participating all have a say in what gets put on them, the systems that get to put in them, the information that's traded across them. When it comes to firing a missile, to deploying more equipment for the troops, these type of things then take on a joint atmosphere as opposed to just being U.S. led. So all of our systems that aim to interoperate or interconnect these networks, the different classified networks, there's all kinds of different classifications, and range from really high stuff that the intel community uses to more of the mid-level classifications that the war is fought on. It is very difficult. I'm trying to get to an answer here, but I don't know if I'll do it in the next couple of seconds. But you wanted to know what was the... Given what I just said...
It seems like you have not changed, When you're a professor, you talk for 40 minutes and the student says, "What did you say?" No, I think you nearly addressed the point, which was trying to give people an impression of an idea of the challenges associated with multinational forces on the ground and the lack of interoperable systems, and how do you overcome that?
Yeah. So the systems interoperate to a certain extent. I mean, we all speak the same protocols. It's not like the systems that they use in France or in, I'm trying to think of other coalition partners. Well, our Afghan mission partners don't speak the same protocols. But when it comes to the rules by which you get to exchange the data, that's where it gets very, very hairy. I mean, you take the whole group of nations that combine to form our coalition in Afghanistan, and we have better relationships with some of those nations than others. And so when it comes to sharing mission data, there are caveats to how much we can share, and some stuff, some stuff doesn't go beyond the U.S. borders, and those borders extend to our networks too. So it's not just the geographic borders. We maintain our own networks, we operate them, and we don't share beyond them certain types of critical data that's sensitive. But there is the U.S. is working very hard, and the meetings I've been in, they are emphasizing the need to open up more of that data to more people that are helping us to fight the war, and I think that is one of the big battles right now.
That's good. So that sets the stage for the question for Roman, where I want him to tell us what are the threats to our privacy that the U.S. government, what is the information U.S. government is looking at on all individuals? No.
So I'm going to keep going. I was going to kind of back up and add a little bit to kind of exactly that issue. I think what's changed in the U.S. government in the last couple of years is a real appreciation for the cliche, right? The interconnectedness of it all. We can envision in the media, these big operation centers where, guys are sitting at keyboards having situational awareness. You see the UAV video kind of in one big screen and, fancy charts in another, flag officers kind of walking around making sure everything works. Yeah, that's true, kind of. Mostly it's smoke and mirrors anyway, right, to justify the existence of that big center. There is kind of a real appreciation for the need to share information, even if it's sometimes kind of one way with what's happening in industry. And all of those places, in addition to thinking about what's happening in theater, they're also sucking in a lot of information that everyone else is doing in the commercial space, trying to understand what is this situational awareness in the internet. A lot of DoD systems are very much interconnected with things on the internet. They're not kind of an island. I mean, we talked about a lot of classification data, but think about all the defense contractors in which DoD is doing business with. Payroll, inventory, how you buy screws, hammers, and so there is a lot of interest in understanding kind of big picture what's happening on the internet and kind of reflecting that back in the government. And there's a lot of instances where there's a recognition that you need to give information back to private sector based on big picture insights that the government's made. And I think there's been certainly some advances in sharing that class of information back to the private sector.
Let me switch to Adrian, because he's the other security guy. So Adrian, in computer science, there's a great concept called zero knowledge proofs, where I can prove to you something without transmitting any knowledge, which is the whole idea of a lecture that a professor gives, where I can prove to you I know without telling you what is it that I know. Given that, and that you're a specialist and a leader in networking, what do you think is the technology going forward which would allow us to have networks that are secure, at the same time hide the private information from unwanted people?
Right, that's a very interesting challenge to design networks that don't disclose information about people or people that don't misbehave. So essentially, here's what you'd like to do. The network could collect information, but that remains secret as long as people don't misbehave. For example, if somebody does perform an attack, then suddenly there's enough information that is available that the attacker loses the privacy. So that's some of the concepts that we're studying to look at how can we design these networks in a way that, in a common case, they're private, but in some cases when someone misbehaves, you can actually exactly figure out who did it and what they did. And essentially through the attack, they uncover their own privacy.
Well, that's good. So that's part of the work that you guys are doing in your group.
Right. So for example, there's also future car networks, and it's conceivably in a few years your vehicles will all communicate to each other when you drive down the highway. And there's a lot of privacy issues in this space as well. Together with car manufacturers, we're right now looking at how to design systems that preserve drivers' privacy, but in cases where somebody misbehaves, you still need to trace people who are misbehaving and have that ability to trace.
That leads me to Lorrie now, because one can design these complex systems, but clearly they're going to be as useful as a human being or his or her ability to use them. So say a little bit about how do we make these systems usable, because I think I'm an expert in computers, but I hate looking at these stupid privacy notices when I log into a website. I have no idea what I'm signing up for.
Yeah, so that's the challenge, is to make it secure and private and usable. And I think until recently, there hadn't been a whole lot of work in that direction. For the most part, security people, when they did their threat modeling, they were basically looking at the evil Eve, and what that was a threat to the system, and not really paying attention to the normal users of the system and the kind of threat they pose, because they can't figure out how to use it properly, and that actually poses a big threat. And so in our work, we've been looking at how do we take into account the abilities of the normal users and their interests and their motivations, and the fact that they don't really want to have to spend a lot of time doing security. They don't feel like it's their job. And you can put up all the posters in the workplace that security is everyone's job, but most people say, hey, it's not really my job. Someone else should do that. So we've been looking at how do we come up with models so that we can take all of that into account, and also try to counter some of the mythology of security, that there's a lot of things that we do because we just, well, everybody knows, right? You do that. And it turns out that it's actually not increasing our security a whole lot, but it is making things really inconvenient. So for example, one that you probably all can relate to is passwords. Recently, CMU for the Andrew Network, they made everybody change their password, and they said that we now all have to have a capital letter, a lowercase letter, a symbol, and a number in our password. And in theory, that's to make it more secure. But it's not really clear that that actually makes passwords more secure. And this actually inspired my students to kind of spontaneously start a research project looking at how you can maximize password entropy while minimizing the pain to the users. And surprisingly, there actually hasn't been very much research in that area. And so that's something that we're looking at.
I've got a little to add on that, actually. So just one example, there was one of these cross-domain solutions that we were looking to deploy, and we were trying to get a sense of how much it would take to administer it. And it turns out they had one already deployed in another location, and I'll be vague here on purpose, but one specific thing I can tell you is that the system connected a number of networks together into one box, all these different cables running into it. And they said, when they were designing the system, that you had to have certain PKI things, certain certificates, all these passwords. It turned out once they finally deployed it that they were, what was it, like 216 passwords to enter into the system when you started it up. And it took and there were a couple of different people required to be there, to start it up. And it would take over an hour to start up the system from a cold state. So, you can imagine that the people that were busy implementing the security requirements for this particular system had no idea that this would be the result of what they were designing. But, there's just kind of a lack of usability, analysis that was going on there. And I thought, when I heard those numbers, I just couldn't believe it. I thought,
that's actually amazing. So let me go to Alessandro. It seems to me that money can be a great motivator to change human behavior. In fact, there's a great quote attributable to Winston Churchill, which I will not repeat in this polite company, which talked about how money can be the motivator. So you as an economist, tell us something about how can we demotivate the government from collecting too much information, and how can we motivate the individual from giving up or giving out too much information?
Well, I will start with a challenge to the very premise that privacy and security are orthogonal concepts, that we need less of one to have more of the other. Because seeing things from an economics angle, at the individual level, privacy is a way to achieve personal security. I see privacy and security as trade-offs. You reveal lots of personal information. That information could be used against you, for instance, for price discrimination, for blackmailing. And therefore, protecting your data is a way to protect your persona, and you have privacy and security at the same time. At the collective level, sometimes the argument is made that, well, maybe you need privacy to protect yourself, but we need less privacy to protect the nation, to protect all of us. We need to monitor what the evildoers are, and because we don't know who they are, we have to monitor everybody, so that everybody loses on privacy, but everybody gains in security. I would challenge that as well on two grounds. The first ground is that accumulating massive amounts of data creates itself huge security problems. And time and again, we're seeing that both corporations and the government, sadly, cannot be trusted with maintaining the protection of our data. So we create these one point of failures, which creates new security problems by virtue of accumulating so much data. And the second angle is that, in reality, we already have tremendous technologies to achieve privacy and security at the same time. And this is what also Adrian was referring to a few minutes ago. For the more technologically oriented in this room, which is pretty much the majority of you, I may quote homomorphic encryption or blind signature. Homomorphic encryption are protocols, cryptographic protocols used, for instance, in electronic voting. They ensure privacy, provable privacy of voting, and also provable verifiability and security of voting. Way better than the current really, really bad system used in electronic voting. I don't even remember the name of the company producing this, the electronic voting machine, which now again have been shown to be truly faulty. We have Diebold, thank you. Well, we have much better than that. Cryptographers like Adrian and others in other universities work on protocols which are probably secure. So the challenge is how we make them work in the market. Blind signature. Developed in the 80s, David Chaum, Stefan Brands, and used, for instance, in anonymous payments. They allow for payments to be anonymous, but they also allow, as Adrian was referring to, in case somebody tries to double spend, well, that person's privacy is revoked by the protocol. So we do have technologies for privacy and security. The challenge is how to make them work in the marketplace. And this is, in a way, going back to the initial part of your question, which is a true challenge, because often, as individuals, as well as at the level of corporations, we focus on the immediate cost and benefits, and we don't think about the long-term cost and benefits. We think that changing the electing system, the electoral system, to use these voting technologies may be very costly, which can be true in the short run, but the benefits are huge in the long run. So the issue is, can we hit the short-term cost if there is a long-run benefit to achieve? And sometimes we have too much a myopic view of things, and we decide to keep things as they are, keep the status quo, even if it's neither private nor secure.
Thanks, Alessandro. One of the things you forgot to mention is Lorrie works on technologies where the electronic voting machine will not have the problem of hanging chads, because everybody would know how to use them properly. Right, Lorrie?
Yeah.
Good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at you to ask questions, and if I don't see any hands, then I'm just going to keep on asking questions from my side. Okay, people are telling me to shut up now. Perfect. So you are one, you are two. Tylisa.
So my question is, I'm an information security major, and almost all of my classes this semester we talked about net neutrality. But one thing about it is the security aspect that no one really mentions. So from your views, what are the security implementations that are involved with net neutrality, and what do you think about the Court of Appeal ruling against the FCC?
So before anybody answers, instruction to my panelists, don't feel obligated to answer. Everybody should not feel obligated to answer every question, because otherwise we'll only be answering one question. So go ahead, whoever feels most comfortable. Who wants to take that? If you don't take it, I'll assign it.
I guess I can take this one. Actually, net neutrality, one of the, maybe I should explain a little bit what it means for most people in a non-zero knowledge based way, hopefully. So in a nutshell, it's about ISPs' ability to, or ISPs that are trying to shape the traffic in a way that, and I see Marvin Serbo is here, he's actually, maybe he should answer this question really, because he is the expert in this field. But essentially, it's about ISPs that are shaping the traffic to their advantage. So, for example, Comcast would try to prevent Skype from, or would downgrade Skype traffic itself in order to provide better service for their own phone offering. And so, in essence, security helps in circumventing such shaping. So, for example, if file sharing would, if one ISP would want to limit file sharing, you could disguise file sharing traffic as legitimate or other traffic that's not being throttled by the ISP. So you can make one traffic look like another. Now, of course, this is oftentimes a cat and mouse game where security is being used to hide traffic and make it look like some other traffic, but then the ISP, noticing this, can try to counteract this. So one example is you could, and that's a very old example where people make web traffic look like DNS requests. That, of course, becomes very quickly obvious if you're looking for it. If you don't look for it, then it goes underneath the radar. But that's been some of the ways in which people try to circumvent such filtering.
Anybody else want to make a comment? Otherwise, we have number 2 waiting.
But
go for
maybe
it.
Marvin. No.
Marvin, you want to?
I'm not sure I actually answered the question, but.
There was part B to that question, but we'll get to that. It was about Court of Appeals or Court of Law or something.
Right. So, I mean, net neutrality, it's a very difficult topic that we could have a whole panel on.
I can comment on the Court of Appeals.
Maybe.
Go for it.
The FCC in 2002 announced that it wasn't going to regulate internet traffic the same way that it was going to regulate telephony. It said we won't use Title II of the Communication Act, we'll just rely on Title I. And then they challenged Comcast's behavior with respect to net neutrality, censured them. Comcast complained in court, and the courts basically held that under Title I, the FCC didn't have enough authority to censure Comcast. And so the Commission is now thinking of undoing its 2002 decision and putting the internet back under Title II.
Earl Crane, I'm an alumni. The question I have, knowing what we are discovering about privacy, economy, threats exposed to our information, are we thinking about security and how we secure our information in the right way, or should we reconsider some of these concepts that we've held for the past 15, 20, 50 years? And what would you propose we reconsider or we change the way we look at how we secure information to control how we think about the problem?
Do I see a hand? Roman, did you raise your hand?
Thank you. How diplomatic.
No, I was just checking.
So the one thing that actually comes to mind when you ask that question is something that just occurred. You know, cloud computing came up in the last panel. And so where are you keeping your information? I mean, the mantra of the cloud is, right, it's not yours anymore. And so what just happened is, the name escapes me, but in the last 2 days there was the arrest of a pretty significant spammer. And what they found is, you know, most of the evidence they have on him is because he kept it in Google Docs in the cloud. So we had an interesting kind of paradigm shift from law enforcement, kind of so to speak. So instead of tracking down the guy, breaking, you know, kind of getting the right warrant, coming to his house, seizing his computer, doing all those things, all they had to do was serve something to Google, who very efficiently said, yes, this is a legal warrant. Happy to give you this information without even actually notifying, you know, whose data it is. And so kind of from a law enforcement perspective, you know, this is actually quite fantastic. ISPs are very much geared through CALEA and a lot of other statute to provide information on others. And so it's kind of an example of, you know, your data is easier to get to because you just physically don't control it. And so, yeah, you certainly have to think about that. You know, we talked about kind of giant eagle, you know, giant eagle cards. One of the kind of the big bugaboos of that is kind of what happens when, you know, giant eagle fails, right? Your data that you willingly gave them, you know, can be auctioned off and kind of sold, you know, sold to others. You know, examples commonly cited from the grocery store model was, you know, I buy a lot of beer. Someone might notice, of course not in Pennsylvania, that I'm buying beer, you know, perhaps, you know, every other day through that credit card transaction. You know, wouldn't a lot of healthcare folks like to know that, you know, I'm buying this much or red meat or kind of whatever it might be. So, back to kind of a lot of stuff is getting collected. You just kind of need to appreciate what's happening.
Anybody else want to add to that? While you guys are thinking about a question, let me pose a question which is similar to net neutrality, but I think of equal value and maybe of different type of importance, and that is anonymity on the network. There is a big crowd of people, really, I don't know if they're right wing or left wing, but one of those wings, that actually strongly believe in anonymity on the network. And I want to pose to our panel, I haven't been able to figure out why should there be any anonymity on the network? How does it impact privacy? How does it impact security? If you don't raise your hand, I will. Lorrie, see, you seem like you're ready.
All right, why should there be anonymity? So I think in general, most people feel like what they do is just not other people's business. And as long as we have a network where everything is tracked, right, you can't really make your business not other people's business. And I think we need to have anonymity so that we can all just be alone and not be bothered. And I agree that there is a tension, and that if everybody was anonymous, then even the bad guys are anonymous too, and it becomes more difficult to track them down. But I think most of us don't want to live in a world where Big Brother is watching us all the time, and so we need to have these mechanisms to allow us to not have everybody following us around and watching everything that we do, and have everything that we say or all our transactions be tracked and archived forever.
Alessandro, he has an economic model.
Oh, kind of. Actually, I was about to pretend to be a law scholar and go back to the American Constitution. So rather than pretending to be an economist. So there are good reasons why we need anonymity, why anonymity can be positive for the individual and for the society. And one example is, going back to the Constitution, amendments to the Constitution, is a way to have free speech. There would be a chilling effect if everything you say should always be identified and connected to you. There is a long jurisprudence in this area. And it is true, people feel freer to express even undesirable and non-popular opinions when their privacy in the form of anonymity is protected. At the same time, there are reasons why, when we don't have anonymity and we don't have privacy, we suffer from that. Several psychological studies have shown that the feeling of being constantly under surveillance, under monitoring, is truly detrimental to the psychology of the individual. There are significant long-term costs. And we human beings, if you see the literature on privacy, anonymity, anthropological studies going back, trying to establish what was the sense of privacy in ancient Rome or ancient Greece or in different countries. It's true that different countries have a different sense of privacy, but you can find a need for privacy in all countries, all times. It takes different forms, but you can always find it because it's an innate psychological need of the individual. If it lacks, if you take it away, the consequence can be negative. So anonymity has psychological protection. That's another reason why we need it. Whether we have it, that's another issue, because studies that Lorrie has been doing, Brad Mellon, who I see sitting there in the audience, has been doing, myself on re-identification or de-anonymization, show that it's become virtually impossible to remain private. There is so much data out there, individual piece of information, personal but maybe not uniquely identifiable, which once connected through data mining can truly re-identify the individual. So effectively we are losing anonymity. But that doesn't mean that we don't need it any longer.
It's interesting though, you take, and I'm just thinking to like web surfing, completely not related to my job, but if you're comparing online services where your identity is tightly bound to your account that you establish with the service versus ones that aren't, it influences behavior, at least from what I've seen. Like if you go on Facebook, people tend to be civil. You tend to, you don't see a lot of spam, a lot of comments. unless you know it's viruses or something. But if you go on YouTube and you read the comments for the average video on YouTube, it's kind of disgusting to read a lot of that stuff that's on there. And people, the accounts that people create it's much more difficult to track those back to a person without the help of law enforcement. And they're not breaking the law. They're just being, who they want to be, and they're kind of shrouded in this. With the account that they have, it's difficult to find out who it really is.
Can I talk about that for a second? I mean, back to, since we're talking about web browsing. So we're talking about kind of who is Big Brother, who is that, right? I mean, let's take an example of Google. It all comes down to convenience, right? A lot of people in this room probably have Gmail accounts. How many of you log out of your Gmail account, clear your cookies before you type something, to actually Google, search for something in Google? A lot of people just kind of don't care and allow that data to accumulate because it's a convenience thing.
Well, I wouldn't say they don't care. I'd say that people do care, but it's really inconvenient. And so there's kind of a trade-off between, am I willing to spend that amount of time? I mean, the cost of privacy is actually very expensive.
Well, that and there is some value. I guess Google at least would tell you that there's some value to them collecting your searches over time. They could then offer you more customized search results.
Yeah, they have figured out how to monetize it for themselves. But then the stock value goes up, and then we make money. Alessandro, you want to do? Or just go ahead, Adrian.
Just one more issue is also that has changed a lot is the sheer simplicity at which you can gather data these days. Of course, a lot of data is available digitally, but again, in the context of vehicular ad hoc networks, which is a very active area that car companies are working on these days, there's an interesting challenge, which is if vehicles broadcast their identity 10 times a second, are we losing a lot of privacy? And one of the interesting counter-arguments is, well, vehicles already have license plates that already uniquely identify your car. But then, why would we really care about these wireless messages being sent? Well, it's actually the simplicity at which you can really follow people. If you need to set up cameras all along the way and then you need to identify each license plate, that's not that easy and it's not as reliable. However, if vehicles broadcast wirelessly their identity 10 times a second, it becomes very easy for everyone to track everyone else. And so these new technologies really have a huge impact, and we need to be very careful how we provide and retain anonymity, privacy in such environments.
But they're already doing that, aren't they? With the traffic, you pull up the traffic view on Google Maps, and they're aggregating the.
So what they're doing is based on cell phones. So you could say, well, people can track cell phones, but there the argument is, with cell phones, you have an option to opt out of it.
Okay.
You don't need to have a cell phone, but if you have a car, you would have to have this built in. And you can. Turning off your cell phone turns out not to be sufficient, not to be tracked, so you actually have to remove the battery. But you have that option to remove the battery out of your cell phone, but that's the issue in cars, you can't turn off the system.
But do you really think that there's, in today's day and age, not having a cell phone is any more of a choice than not having a car? I would actually sooner give up my car than my cell phone. I walk to work, so,
Well, you certainly have that choice as well. However, again, in the cell phone, you can remain anonymous by removing, or at least you can't be traced when you walk around. If you remove the battery,
but
you can
then
still
I can't talk
take
on
the
it
bus,
either.
right? But you can still
we're
get.
We're gonna hand it over to Alessandro, and then question number 3 and question number 4. So go for it.
Just a quick comment. I thought that Matt was made a very true and important point in terms of hinting at the potential antisocial behavior that anonymity can bring online. And there is definitely, undeniably, some empirical evidence for that. Among economists, there is a famous paper by Paul Resnick called The Social Cost of Cheap Pseudonyms, showing that cheap pseudonyms, so easy anonymity, can decrease the overall welfare of a certain system. However, interestingly, there is also evidence of the contrary. Studies by Ted Posner, who is a sociologist, social psychologist, sorry, has shown how anonymity can increase collaboration in a team. And he argues that's because by collaborating anonymously online, the sense of the ego, the sense of contributing to your ego decreases, and the value of contributing to the group increases. So my point being, there is evidence that it could lead to antisocial behavior. There is also evidence for the opposite. As usual in research and in real life, the devil is in the details.
I think collaborating anonymously also is advantageous to the students. You will never get caught. Or even if you get caught, the other parties would not be culpable anymore. Anyway, question number 3.
One of those should I be most concerned about? And I would like to have a follow-up there.
Alessandro, you want to take that, or Lorrie?
Well, okay. If I were to answer the question for myself, I would take an economist approach, which is marginal cost, marginal benefits, which is what is the additional cost it would take me to protect a certain type of information, my financial information, my family information, my personal, sexual, or health information, and then the marginal cost of not protecting it. If I suffer from a very contagious disease, maybe it's very important for me to protect health information. If I'm sane, healthy like a fish, probably I don't need to spend, in fact, I don't want to spend a lot in protecting my health privacy. In fact, I want everybody to know, right? So it really depends on your personal cost, to your personal cost and benefits, to what information about you can cause you more damage and what information about you, if traded, can bring you more benefit.
So I don't quite understand that, because it is not that there's money to be made. For example, there's money to be made by giving out information. In fact, not giving Giant Eagle my information costs me 10% every time I go shop there. Right? So, so I'm trying to understand, what is the choice out here?
Just steal someone else's Giant Eagle card.
Actually, Lorrie?
Well, so I think that there's some aspects of privacy that can have direct financial impact. So, for example, if information about you getting revealed costs you a job, right? That cost you money. The fact that information that you didn't want to get out got out, or if it causes you not to get health insurance, that costs you money. But then there's also a lot of intangibles of just certain information got out and now I'm embarrassed. Well, it didn't cost me money directly, but it has value to me, and you have to figure out how to put a price on that. And with Giant Eagle, yeah, so is $10 a week or whatever 10% of your grocery bills is. Weigh that versus, okay, well, what is the risk if Giant Eagle can track everything that I eat, and they might sell it to who knows, and you can make that personal calculation.
You want to follow up?
Given that there's multiple areas of our lives that we need to be concerned about and manage, how should we as a society wrestle with the issue of what you talked about before, anonymity? Because in some cases, organizations like terrorist groups, the Ku Klux Klan, they thrive when they can be in secret. But then, and so that's something you would say, well, they don't need anonymity. But there are other cases in our history, like a dissenting voice, like founding this nation, where if a lot of light was shown on them, they could have been shut down, or founded our nation. So how do we balance that trade-off between the need for privacy?
Who wants to take that? Seems like it's politically charged. Go ahead, Alessandro.
No, it probably will be not a satisfactory answer. In fact, it's not a direct answer. It's just a mention of maybe a resource to look more after, which is Justice Brandeis. Warren Brandeis were the two authors of the seminal work on privacy that some of you in this room took my class, my privacy class, and it's discussed in every privacy class in this country, the right of privacy. Harvard Law Review 1890 or 1891? 1890 probably? 1890. Warren Brandeis at the time were two young, upcoming Boston lawyers who discussed the need for privacy as a protection for invasion in your private space. Around 30 years later, Brandeis became a Supreme Court justice and wrote a new work on the need for transparency in the government. Brandeis was a strong believer in individual privacy and transparency of corporations and the government. I share his views, but I would recommend both his manuscripts as a young lawyer and then as a Supreme Court justice, because they are truly enlightening documents.
Let's go to question number 4, and then I want to come back to this year 5. 4. So the question, in case you didn't hear it, is what do you think is the next generation protocols for security and privacy research, right? For medical, right, for medical research. Adrian?
I can, okay, nobody's wrestling. So, well, some of the difficulties in the medical space is the distinction between the need to know and the not needing to know. So, for example, recently there's been some audits of some hospitals where medical information was being accessed of some celebrities that were delivered in hospitals, and immediately there were a bunch of accesses by doctors and nurses and other staff, and only one of these accesses was legitimate. So what was interesting is through the access logs, you could exactly tell who made the accesses, and then later on you could determine which accesses were legitimate and which ones weren't. And so the staff that made the illegitimate accesses, they then were faced with some detentions. So essentially, looking at this as an example gives us a way to deal with these issues in the future as well. So such tracing, for example, can help you in providing a deterrent for illegitimate accesses. So just to take a concrete example, let's say in future homes you have a door lock that can be opened by any medical staff if they have reason to believe that there was some emergency. So for example, you face a heart attack or somebody dialed 911, they can actually come and open your door lock in the home. And later on, if there's been an illegitimate intrusion, you could later go back and say, well, it's this person who opened it, and the access was illegitimate. So that's one of the promising directions to go in, but of course, there's a lot of privacy and issues that come up in this context if you log a lot of these accesses. But again, deterrence can be a very powerful force against such accesses, especially in the medical field. And I think that's one of the best ways for handling privacy in medical areas, I believe.
So let me understand that. So I think the question was, what are the next generation protocols?
Right.
And I think, so I read that as technical protocols like TCP/IP or standards like HTML. But I think what you're suggesting is that infrastructure is going to pretty much remain the same, and there have to be a layer of protocols above that, which are behavioral, policy-oriented protocols that will decide who has access to what information, how often, and so on and so forth.
Or essentially equip these protocols with logging mechanisms that then later on, if there wasn't illegitimate access, to determine who made this access.
I think Roman is not excited. So.
Yeah, I mean, one would think that we actually have all of it. I mean, what we haven't come to on consensus is what's the right way and who we give access to all that, all that data. I mean, because logging on access to databases, kind of repositories, we know how to do that. It's just I don't think we have a consensus on what we should be giving out, who should we really be having access to it. I mean, it's not a technical problem. What am I missing?
There's part B. Okay, go for it.
Core security protocols, zero knowledge proofs, encryption protocols that allow you to put your data encrypted on the web, on the grid, so that certain programs can analyze it, and then in a secure way you can get the data that's needed. It's more like on a security protocol level, not so much on the network protocol level or the log level.
Right.
Yeah, but to me, that's working out the policy, right? Because everything you're kind of talking about, you're trying to enable some use case. Do we have consensus on all the use cases we would want, and how would we enable them?
Use case like when I'm looking at threats,
Right. So maybe you can give a specific example of a protocol we've worked here a couple of years ago. Actually, Asim Smilejic, who's also sitting there, was one of the collaborators in this effort. So we essentially looked at ways to prevent diseases of the future, or essentially informing people who would catch, say, hepatitis by eating some food in some restaurant. So what we did is we created an environment where people would wear sensors that track essentially where you're going, and that would leave encrypted marks, essentially encrypted breadcrumbs, whatever you've done and wherever you've been. And now these breadcrumbs would be encrypted in a fashion that if there was an outbreak, a legitimate outbreak of some illness, and you crossed a path with one of these people, then you could get notified by this effort, by this system. So, for example, if you ate at the same restaurant as several people got an illness, often we utilized a variety of cryptographic mechanisms to implement this, such as secret sharing. So you would have, we had the property, for example, if at least 5 people got ill and they ate at the same restaurant on the same day, then my breadcrumb can be decrypted, and then I could be notified. So this is an example of a specific protocol, and I can refer you to the paper ultimately.
So let's go to question number 5 and then number 6, and we will nearly end at number 6. Go for it.
Hi, my name is Grant, CS 2008. My question is, what responsibility are these data collectors going to have in the near future? Because I've heard of sites like YouTube's gotten in trouble for like when users submit copyrighted contents. Craigslist has gotten in trouble when people post ads that cover for prostitution rings. A couple sites have gotten in lots of trouble for times when someone breaks in and steals some of this information. And also, my boss once told me about the site called PleaseRobMe.com, which it's basically collecting data from Twitter and telling people that they're not home.
Who wants to take that?
I mean, I'll
Roman?
give kind of a quick response. What is their responsibility? As little as they can get away with without getting sued. I mean, to be perfectly blunt, I mean, it's a trade-off with regulatory things to where they think the hit's going to be on their reputation. The Twitter thing is kind of funny because, right, this week Library of Congress said everything that's public we're going to try to archive. So we, kind of in the coming weeks, when we see how that discussion goes. It seems to me that there's some companies that really are Teflon, right? They get away with this stuff all the time. Facebook regularly, does odd things with privacy. People still come back because everyone kind of loves it. It would seem like other companies survive less from it. But I think the positive thing is we're seeing more convictions of folks exfiltrating data from organizations. There's real jail time happening, and so there at least is some consciousness that it's a penalty. It's perhaps a more severe white-collar crime here, at least in the States.
But then there's also cases like the YouTube Google case where 5 Google executives got arrested in Italy because they had failed to take down some content. Now, they took it down when they were notified, but Google doesn't routinely go and look at every video that is uploaded. And the Italian court said, doesn't matter, you're guilty. And I think a lot of the response in the privacy community has been that, well, on the one hand, protecting privacy and not having this stuff up is a good thing, but on the other hand, it's not really realistic to demand of all companies like Google and YouTube that they check every bit of content up there. So there's kind of a dilemma there.
Well, legal-wise too, and this is kind of a personal story, but I got a letter the other week from a web retailer saying that their payment systems had been compromised, and it's possible that my credit card data got inadvertently downloaded. I was impressed with the letter, not only because they just completely came out with it, but also in the top corner, there was a card that I could use to get in contact with an identity theft prevention or protection agency, where they would take my case and then work at, and that was offered free of charge for the next year. So at any time, if my identity is stolen, I can work with these guys to help. And they weren't, I don't even have to prove that it came from this particular incident. It could have been from anything. But that would have never happened at that whole, I forget what the first case was. It was out in California where a payment processor was compromised and it came out after the fact, and then they were forced by some law to notify everybody that happened. I think that legal precedent, that law kind of set the stage for that deterrent to start to work, and for companies to probably store less credit card data for less time, or take better care of it while they do have it.
But actually, Matt, how do you know this letter was legitimate?
You're right. You're right. I don't.
Number 6.
My name is Innocent, current student in the Pittsburgh Silicon Valley program, Special Information Security. Some attacks, some criminals use information from public domain or company websites. How do you encourage openness and transparency without compromising privacy or security of these companies or government agencies? Is this something that's achievable, or it's like privacy and security, like Acquisti was saying?
Yeah, I mean, that's, two anecdotal things, right? That's what whale fishing is all about. That's how I know what that is. And kind of secondly, how did allegedly Sarah Palin's email account get hacked? It's those, those backup questions, not your password, but those personal questions that honestly no one should answer truthfully, because we can garner most of that, off the net. And you're right. I mean, I don't have an answer for you. It's really a trade-off. You're kind of exactly right. And so we shouldn't rely on mechanisms that when we post that up there, we should infer kind of trust from that information.
Let me make one comment. I'm told that we are out of time, but I think I want to make one comment just to make you aware. So let's assume that we could fix the security and privacy issue the way we want within the U.S. Even if we did that, we would have not done much, because the internet is pretty much global, and unless we harmonize laws, both on the security side and the privacy side internationally, there is not much progress we are going to make. And I think as we leave this panel, while we are more informed about issues that relate to security and privacy, at least within this country, let's not forget that whenever we get a chance, we have to think about harmonizing the laws across states, across countries, on an international basis. So with that, please join me in giving my panel a big hand.